Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 3 of Buttercast, and I'm very happy that you're back here listening to me for more. Last week, I closed with a note saying that if you're thinking about starting podcasting, just start, stop thinking. Really, starting is 50% of the way. I can't remember who said that, but I love that because it is so true, at least from my experiences. When you get started, no matter how badly you do, you're always going to be able to course correct because other people or things that happen are going to tell you if you're going the right way or not. Here's a great example. So I started this podcast 2 weeks ago, and I've gotten a lot of feedback since then, shared some of it last week, and I'm going to be sharing a little more this week. And I would never have gotten that feedback if I did not start. That's actually why I started this podcast, because I want to get good at this stuff. And I know I'm not very good yet. Maybe some people really enjoy this podcast. I don't know. But I don't feel I'm there. I can't say that I'm very confident in my ability. But I'm happy that I'm doing it because I'm learning it while doing it. And that's just the best way for me. It's always been that way ever since I was back in school. And, even in my entrepreneurial career, I've created a lot of companies. Many of them went bust. And, many of the success stories you see out there, I'm sure they're going to have a lot of failures and companies that have gone bust or, their careers got really sidetracked for some reason, whatever. But the difference is between many people who are thinking of doing something, they actually started doing things and they started bumping on walls and they started falling and getting back up and falling again. But the good thing about falling is you just keep learning and learning about how to fall. So I'm falling now, and but I think every episode is going to get better and better, and then hopefully a year down the road, I'm going to look back at these episodes and just laugh at myself and say, "Wow, what a noob I was." Okay. So, for those of you who are thinking of starting your own podcast and are still not convinced that you can do this, I want to talk to you about some myths that I came across around podcasting that I want to share with you. And I'm going to debunk them for you as well as I can. And maybe that'll be the last push that you need to get started with this. Now, the main one is, people think that they don't have enough money to get started because they have to buy all this professional equipment and they have to buy like a special studio gear and really expensive audio recording software and things like that. Well, I've been talking about this for a while already, but I'm only talking to you on my regular laptop using a Blue Yeti microphone that doesn't cost a whole lot. I don't have the cost in front of me, but you can find it in the show notes of the first episode. There's a link to their website. I'll put another link in the show notes for this episode. So getting started with podcasting is not as expensive as people think, but for some reason people, I guess, get this vision of podcasters sitting in a really expensive studio with sophisticated equipment around them, like a 50-track mixer or something. That's not the case. I'm just some guy sitting in his living room on the dinner table with his laptop and his microphone, just talking to you. And that's all I'm doing. Yes, I'm using some specialized audio software thanks to having a co-founder who is in the audio business. I've been able to get some plugins for cheap that make me sound a little better, but there's a lot of free tools that I'll be sharing later on. I mentioned an audio editor called Audacity in episode 1, and that is actually a very good tool that has a lot of things that you can use to make your sound better. But even if you don't have any of that, honestly, you don't have to sound perfectly professional. People want to hear you. People want to hear your voice. People want to hear what you have to talk about. Because if you're interested in something, then someone else is interested. So don't worry about the equipment. Just sit down, get started. If you just have like a mobile phone at your disposal with maybe a headset with a microphone, start with that. That's okay. Yeah, there's another myth. This isn't specific to podcasting. Everything has one way of getting done. Like people are doing something in one way and everybody's doing it the same way, and suddenly it becomes, well, that's the way it's done, right? So that's what people think about podcasting as well. They think that they have to stick to a certain set of rules to be successful with podcasting. And, they imagine that they have to put a show with like an hour interview because a lot of big podcasts are doing that. Or they think that you need to be already successful, like Tim Ferriss, for example, with his really successful podcast. But there is really no one way of podcasting. You'll realize you want to change your podcast format or something like that. You can do that. Just let your creativity flow. Don't worry about what society thinks or what other podcasters think unless you care about what they're saying. If it resonates with you, take it. If it doesn't, just leave it. You don't have to adhere to a set of rules that doesn't make sense to you. Use whatever you want to and discard anything else. And then a lot of people get intimidated because they think nobody's going to listen to their podcast. Look, I started 2 weeks ago and I've been communicating with a few dozen people already. Now, sure, I have a sizable Twitter following. I'll give you that. But I don't have any other audience. A lot of these people are my friends or people from the Facebook group that I joined. And then some random people are probably stumbling upon the podcast on iTunes or Google Play or whatever. I don't even see the stats yet. I don't know how to do that stuff. I'm learning. But once I learn that, that's going to be great. And I'm going to share that too, because I want to see how many people are listening and how they're coming to the show and things like that. But anyway, we'll leave that for a future episode. But people will listen to your podcast. Maybe one will listen today and two will listen the other day. And then you put out episodes constantly for a year, each week. At the end of the year, you have 50 episodes. And you look back and suddenly you see that your first episode got 1,000 listens so far. And imagine if you had 50 episodes with 1,000 listens each. That is big numbers, hundreds of thousands of listens. Well, that's tens of thousands of listens. And it is possible. I'm sure I'm going to hit those numbers on this show. You know why? Because I'm going to keep doing it until I get there. And I'm going to keep promoting my podcast. I'm going to keep talking about it to people outside of the podcast. I'm going to keep tweeting about it. I'm going to put it on Reddit. I'm going to put it anywhere I can think of. And I'm going to keep getting feedback too. I'm going to keep asking for feedback so that, people tell me what I'm doing wrong and, things like that. And then some others, they get intimidated because they think they have to have a guest on their show, but nobody's going to want to be on their show because they're not popular enough. You don't have to get somebody who's really famous on your show in the beginning. You can get a fellow podcaster who's starting out like you, or you could get someone from your workplace. You can get someone from your friends, like let's say you're doing a podcast about video games and you like talking about video games to one of your friends a lot. Well, talk to them on the show. Sit down and just chat with them. Who knows, maybe they'll graduate from being your guest to your co-host and you'll have a really nice long-term relationship. You never know where these things are going to go once you get started. So the more you do this, start from your personal network, start little, you'll start spiraling out. You'll start getting more and more people interested in the show. The more listens you get, the more you keep doing this, then the more people are going to be attracted to you. And then you'll be able to start landing bigger and bigger names over time. And maybe at some point, you're going to be able to get anyone you want on the show. And that would be amazing. That's one of my goals too. I want to get somebody who's really famous on this show someday. But yeah, I mean, long shot right now. Who's going to care about coming on Buttercast right now, right? But it could be a possibility a year or two down the road. I'm never dismissing that. In fact, I'm actually aiming for it. Because if somebody else is doing it, why wouldn't I be able to do it? It just takes perseverance, I think. So, yeah, I'm sure somebody will want to be on your podcast as a guest. If you're just starting out like me, ask me. I'll be happy to come on your show right now. There you go. You just landed your first guest. So don't let that stop you. And then finally, some people who want to start podcasting that I see are getting stuck on the technical side of things. They're like, well, it is difficult to set up all this stuff. I need to set up a website. I need to put out the RSS feed thing. And I don't know how that works. And I need to get everything on iTunes and Google Play. How do I go through Apple? How do I do this and that? You know, Technical stuff, yes, it is a pain. I talked about this in the previous episode, but it is difficult to get all that stuff figured out. I'll give you that much. But it is not impossible. You can do it. Anyone can do it because, you know, I think I remember reading somewhere that there's now 300,000 shows on iTunes alone. It's 300,000 podcasts up there. That means 300,000 people figured it out. You can too. I'm pretty sure about that. It'll have a learning curve. It had for me. I had to figure out how to get iTunes to accept my RSS feed with very, very little feedback given from them. And so it took a while, but I finally got there. If I can do it, you can do it. Trust me. So now I want to talk to you about some of the feedback I got from last week's episode. It was interesting feedback, and I agree with much of it too. So people told me that my voice sounded a little better in episode 1. And when I look at the differences between the two episodes, I tend to agree. I actually didn't do so well on the second episode. And I'll give you the reasons why, at least the reasons I think it's why. And the main one, I think, is the distance between myself and the microphone. Now, last episode, I tried moving a little further away from the microphone so that I could minimize the bass coming in from my voice and also try to make it sound a little clearer, but it had the opposite effect. The basses, they're the same. There was no change, but my voice actually had a little more of a noise profile in it. That's why I've tried to go back to episode 1's voice as much as I could. So I'm again talking to you through the microphone from a fist's length. I'm back to that distance and hopefully it sounds good again. I'm using the exact same effects and same mastering settings that I had in episode 1, so hopefully that is also good. I also want to give a special thanks to Harris, who does the Sleep Whisperers podcast. It is a great podcast if you're having any trouble falling asleep at all. I usually don't have that trouble, thankfully. I just fall asleep as soon as I hit a pillow. But I gave his podcast a try. I was actually listening to this one episode that talks about YouTube's story. And I had to stop a couple minutes into it because my eyelids were getting heavy in the middle of the day. And I couldn't have that since I had to record this. So definitely give it a try. It's a great podcast. A very good example of a very original monologue format too. So I got some specific mastering related tips as well. Now for people out there who are not familiar with the term mastering, it is just some buzzword that's used by audio people, which just means making your audio sound pleasant and nicer than it normally is. It's kind of like airbrushing pictures in magazines where they make pictures look much better with shadows and stuff. This is the equivalent in audio. It's called mastering. So, when doing mastering, I'm using noise reduction, a thing we call an equalizer, and then another tool called a de-esser. Now, the first is called noise reduction because that's what it does. It just reduces background noise, the hissing sound that you hear in the background, or hopefully you don't hear right now, but you would hear it on like a blank tape, for example. If you hear that, then my noise reduction has failed. But if you don't, then the noise reduction is working perfectly. And it's the white noise that usually creeps in there. It sounds like a waterfall if you listen to it closely. So after I run everything through the noise reduction, I run them through an equalizer. An equalizer is just a tool that boosts some frequencies of voice, and it can also cut some frequencies of voice. Like you can give more bass or remove bass from your voice. You can add trebles or you can remove them and such and such. So because I have a baritone voice, there's a lot of bass in there. And if I just left that in, it would get really tiresome really quickly. You guys would just, want to get your headphones out before I was done because you might get a headache or something. So that's why I remove the basses a lot. Like I try to minimize them, but I also don't want to sound too brittle. So there's a balance to it. And then I also change some of the mid ranges so that the voice sounds just right. It's it is kind of a matter of preference too, but the basses were really the biggest issue for me. Depending on your voice, you might have a lot of trebles that you want to cut or you might want to boost. It's totally based on preference, but this process is really something that makes you sound a little more professional, maybe, and I like it. And then finally, I use the de-esser. What the de-esser does is it de-esses your audio, hence the name. So when I'm saying so, there's going to be a sharp S sound that could really get annoying to you, especially if you're listening on headphones, because the S sound is going to be very sharp and it's going to be high frequency. It's going to pierce your ears if I don't use it correctly, and I don't want that. So I use a de-esser and I try to remove some of that sharpness of my S's to sound a little more pleasant and not to hurt your eardrums. So hopefully I'm succeeding on that. If not, let me know. I'll play around with its frequencies because it works by reducing the volume of some frequency ranges. And it's not something that's perfect. You need to keep fine-tuning it. But I think it should be okay at this point. So I'm actually surprised right now that we've gone around 20 minutes because I think that I had a lot more to talk about, but that's a good thing. That means that I'm going to be with you with another episode soon enough because I have a lot of topics to cover. For now, I'm just going to say goodbye till next week, but please, as always, don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends and family to subscribe. And I'm very happy to connect with any of you on Twitter, so please feel free to hit me up there anytime you like.